Finally, yeah, I tried turning on this camera like 4 times, and each time I hit record, it didn't work. And then I tried turning it on several more times, and the camera wouldn't even turn on. So, well, I'm not having computer issues anymore. I'm having camera issues. So that's a life update, and that was 20 seconds of being off topic. So let's get on topic again. So, stop rehabilitating Dwight Eisenhower. I know I've been making so many videos about rehabilitating people and not rehabilitating people. So, uh, it's getting a little repetitive, but it's a really good point to make because the more you rehabilitate people with horrible policies, you unfortunately end up rehabilitating the policies themselves, and when they get repeated, the normal reaction becomes, well, this person also did that policy, and everyone did this horrible war crime or horrible tax cut or horrible whatever, and so it's not so bad anymore. And that's a completely damaging, destructive position to take because it only leads to a repetitive cycle of doing the same failed policies over and over again. The tax cuts and the union busting and the deregulation under Calvin Coolidge in the 1920s, and then the tax cuts and the union busting and deregulation under Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. Ronald Reagan, who specifically looked up to Calvin Coolidge as a hero. And so it leads to a destructive cycle, Great Depression, Great Recession, uh, war crimes in against Native Americans to war crimes against people of Iraq, war crimes against people of Syria, war crimes against people of Iran, regime change in Hawaii to regime change in Iran to regime change in Guatemala. You see, it's such a repetitive, horrible cycle. So let's break the cycle. Now, I've talked about Dwight Eisenhower a lot, how he gave a speech condemning the military industrial complex and criticizing them. And he's really praised and remembered and rehabilitated for that reason. And they act like he was totally against the military industrial complex, when in reality, Dwight Eisenhower was the very first post World War II president, meaning he became president after World War II was completely over. Remember, Harry Truman became president 4 months before the end of World War II, and he was president for 8 years. FDR was president when World War II began, and that was 6 years into his presidency, and 8 years into FDR's presidency, 2 years into the war, U.S. got involved in World War II because the Japanese attacked the United States. But anyway, so Dwight Eisenhower was the very first post World War II president. So what Dwight Eisenhower really did was he gave a speech criticizing the military industrial complex on his very last day in office when he had been president for 8 years. People won't mention that the military industrial complex speech was actually his farewell address to the American people. It's basically his way of saying, hey, I served the military industrial complex and I was totally beholden to warmongers and war criminals, and I was also a war criminal myself. But now that I'm on my way out, I'm just going to give a speech where I mildly criticize them, and this will help rehabilitate my reputation, and cement my legacy as this guy who spoke out against the military-industrial complex. So it was his really deceptive way of rehabilitating himself. And of course, as I've mentioned, Dwight Eisenhower overthrew Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh of Iran because Dwight Eisenhower wanted Iran's oil. Dwight Eisenhower overthrew the government of Guatemala. Dwight Eisenhower did terror campaigns in Indonesia, and Dwight Eisenhower started U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Dwight Eisenhower did the permanent military occupation of South Korea. Dwight Eisenhower packed his cabinet with corporate executives who slowly and they were crypto. Basically, what they did was they reined in and limited the New Deal programs. But in public, Dwight Eisenhower pretended he supported the New Deal because he knew it would be political suicide to oppose such popular policies. So, but his corporate executives, his cabinet members, the corporate executives he appointed to his cabinet were busy trying to find ways to slow down and get rid of the New Deal programs. Because, as you know, New Deal programs were a progressive program and they were supposed to get even better with time, but Dwight Eisenhower's cabinet that he appointed worked to slow them down. And let's get to Dwight Eisenhower's election, how he was elected president. Remember, there was a cult of personality around him, and as Eleanor Roosevelt referred to it, she called it hero worship. They were worshiping a World War II hero, a war hero. So Dwight Eisenhower was general during World War II. So lots of people really liked him, and there was a cult of personality around him. Oh, this hero general needs to be elected president because he's a hero from World War II. And there was a similar cult of personality around Zachary Taylor back in the election of 1848. If you remember, Zachary Taylor was a general during the Mexican-American War, and that was how he got known, and he was a war hero and actually a war criminal, but point is, that's why he got so popular, and people elected him president because there was hero worship around him, and similar with Dwight Eisenhower. Now, when Dwight Eisenhower was running for president in 1952, the fact that Dwight Eisenhower was not religious came under scrutiny, and people criticized that. So, what did Dwight Eisenhower do? Well, Dwight Eisenhower, let's give a little background on his religious story first. So Dwight Eisenhower, his family was somewhat religious. I think his parents had joined Jehovah's Witness shortly after. And sorry about that noise, but so Dwight Eisenhower was not religious. He was pretty much atheist for his entire adult life. But in 1952, during the presidential election, he converted his religion. He somehow miraculously converted to Christianity. He became Presbyterian on the recommendation of his spiritual advisor, Billy Graham. And everyone knows Billy Graham. Horrible, horrible guy. Anyway, Dwight Eisenhower basically converted his religion in public because he wanted to pander to religious people and get their votes. It's very similar to what Donald Trump did in 2020, where he converted to non-denominational Christian, and in 2016 he pretended he was Christian even though he hardly ever went to church. Very similar. And so Dwight Eisenhower pandered to religious people by converting his religion. After having been atheist his entire adult life, he miraculously became Christian. And that's just a form of disgusting religious pandering that I can't stand, and I'm sure neither can you. Now, when Dwight Eisenhower became president, he got baptized, as a symbolic gesture. And he would do very symbolic prayer meetings. He would pray before cabinet meetings. He would make a big spectacle out of it. He would make sure that everyone could see him praying. He would make sure that everyone would know that his entire cabinet was praying before prayer meetings, very similar to what Donald Trump did with his cabinet meetings. He would have Ben Carson lead prayers. It's like there's a separation between church and state, and those things should not be together. Disgusting. Anyway, Dwight Eisenhower is also the one who added "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance, and he promoted National Day of Prayer. He promoted praying in schools. And yeah, so there you have it. Dwight Eisenhower. Also, one more thing. Dwight Eisenhower is the one who brought Billy Graham into the White House as a spiritual advisor, and Dwight Eisenhower is the reason why these evangelicals got so much power. He's the one who pretty much brought them into the political spotlight with his favoritism towards Billy Graham and his magical conversion. So if you look at Dwight Eisenhower, he's actually very similar to Donald Trump now, isn't he? Both of them converted in quotes, converted their religion during a presidential election. Both of them did a lot of war crimes against Iran. And yeah, so there you have it. Stop rehabilitating Dwight Eisenhower. Just don't. If you want to reference his military-industrial complex speech and say, well, it's true, well, go ahead and do that, but stop praising him. It's ridiculous.